Welcome, everyone. Today we're taking a trip way back in time. We are talking more than 2.5 millennia to the ancient, bustling port city of Miletus. We're going to explore this incredible intellectual revolution that sparked right there on the shores of the Aegean Sea. And honestly, it was a revolution that completely and permanently changed human thought forever. For the absolute first time, this small group of brilliant minds decided to look at the world completely differently. They didn't just ask what was happening around them, but they started asking why and how. To truly appreciate just how radical this was, we really have to understand the world they were born into. I mean, before these early thinkers came along, the status quo for explaining our chaotic, unpredictable world was purely mythological. If you wanted to know how the universe was created or why a crazy storm was raging outside, you just looked to the epic poetry of Homer and Hesiod. The origins of the cosmos and the forces of nature were explained entirely through the whims, the conflicts, and the petty dramas of these human-like gods. The universe was basically seen as a playground of divine forces, not a system governed by natural laws. Okay, let's dive into this, because this specific question represents what is arguably the greatest intellectual leap in human history. What happens when a storm is just a storm, and not the literal wrath of Zeus? This marks the epic shift from mythos, storytelling and myth, to logos, which is reason, logic, and a rational account. It's that exact moment humanity started trying to solve the giant puzzle of the universe using observation and deduction. Which brings us to part 1. The birth of philosophy. So these foundational thinkers were looking around at the staggering variety of the world. Trees, stones, stars, animals. And they asked, is there a single unifying reality beneath it all? To understand their answers, we absolutely must understand the concept of arche. Arche means the first principle, the fundamental substance or the underlying source of everything. And this concept, it's going to anchor everything we discuss in this explainer today. Because these philosophers realized a very basic logical truth. Out of nothing comes nothing. Therefore, there must be a primordial something, an arche, from which all the immense diversity of the universe originally sprang and to which it eventually returns. Now, this wasn't just some random list of thinkers scattered across history. It's actually a fascinating, multi-generational intellectual mystery. It's a literal master-apprentice chain located right there in Miletus. We have Thales, his student Anaximander, and then his student Anaximenes. What's so incredible about this trio is the scientific method they essentially stumbled upon and pioneered. You take your teacher's brilliant idea, you critically analyze it to find its logical flaws, and then you build a better, more robust model. Let's look at how that worked in part 2, Thales and his theory that everything is water.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Thales actually reached his conclusion. Thales of Miletus is widely recognized as the first true philosopher, and the guy was so incredibly attuned to nature that he famously predicted a solar eclipse in 585 BC. But how did he deduce that water is the arche? Well, he didn't just guess. He used observation. He looked around and saw that the nourishment of all living things is moist. He observed that the seeds of all things have a moist nature. Basically, without water, life simply ceases to exist. Furthermore, he looked at the physical properties of water itself. It's the one substance he could observe with his own 2 eyes transforming into all 3 states of matter, right? It freezes into solid ice, it flows as a liquid, and it evaporates into gaseous vapor. So logically, he deduced that if water can be a solid, a liquid, and a gas, and if it's completely essential for life, it just has to be the fundamental building block of reality.
But then Thales also left us with this rather cryptic quote, "Everything is full of gods." Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't we just say they were moving away from mythology? And we did. Thales wasn't talking about bearded men in the sky hurling lightning bolts. He was expressing a concept called hylozoism. That's the idea that matter itself is alive and dynamic. He pointed to the lodestone, basically a magnet, as proof. Think about how completely mind-blowing that was to someone in the ancient world. A piece of stone possessing an invisible internal power to move iron. No way, right? To Thales, this proved that the fundamental matter of the universe, the water, isn't just dead and inert. It's animated, it's moving, and it is practically alive. That takes us to part 3, Anaximander and the infinite boundless. Let's move to and see how this builds perfectly from what we just discussed. Enter Anaximander, a student of Thales. He respected his teacher immensely, for sure, but he spotted a massive, glaring, logical flaw in the water theory. And as a true philosopher, he had to correct it. He argued that the arche simply cannot be a specific observable element, like water. Why? Because observable elements have specific properties, and the universe is made of opposites. Think about it. Water is inherently wet and cold. Fire is inherently dry and hot. If absolutely everything in the universe was originally made of wet, cold water, then how could dry, hot fire ever exist? The water would have extinguished and destroyed the fire a long time ago. A specific element just cannot spawn its own exact opposite. Therefore, Thales was wrong. So to solve this, Anaximander elevated human thought to an entirely new level of abstraction. He introduced the concept of the apeiron. The apeiron basically translates to the boundless, the infinite, the completely undefined. Anaximander argued that the ultimate source of everything must be entirely free of specific qualities. It can't be wet or dry. It can't be hot or cold. It has to be an infinite, undefined primordial mass, so that it actually has the potential to give birth to all specific opposed things without destroying them in the process.
And he described the interaction of these opposites with this incredibly striking, poetic fragment. It's actually one of the oldest surviving quotes in all of Western philosophy. He said, "They pay penalty and retribution to each other for their injustice according to the assessment of time." Now, what Anaximander is describing here is this cosmic, endless balancing act of justice. Just think of the seasons. The hot, dry summer commits an injustice by dominating the earth, but it eventually pays the penalty and yields to the cold, wet winter, which in turn pays its own penalty to the spring. So the universe is this continuous cycle of opposites emerging from the apeiron, fighting it out, and then returning to balance.
Moving into part 4, Anaximenes and the breath of life. Anaximenes was a generation younger, and while he really admired Anaximander's logic, he kind of felt the whole apeiron thing was just a bit too abstract and invisible. To ground it back into physical reality, Anaximenes confidently declared that the arch is air. But he didn't just pick air randomly. For him, air represented life, dynamic movement, and the literal breath that animates living creatures. He drew this beautiful macrocosm-microcosm parallel. He said, just as the human soul, which they fully believed was a form of breath or air, holds our physical bodies together and gives us life, so does the great cosmic air encompass, hold together, and animate the entire universe. And this brilliantly illustrates his point with an experiment you can literally do right now. Seriously, try it. Purse your lips tightly together and blow onto your hand. The air feels cold, right? But if you open your mouth wide and breathe out, the air feels hot. This highly relatable physical experiment proved to him that changing the density of air directly changes its physical properties, like its temperature. So from that simple breath experiment, he developed an absolute genius mechanism of change. He totally solved the problem of how one single substance becomes many different things. He argued that qualitative differences in the world, the difference between a roaring fire, flowing water, and a hard stone, are simply the result of quantitative changes. It's all just air. It just depends on how tightly it is packed together. When air is rarefied or really thinned out, it becomes fire. As it condenses, it becomes wind, then clouds, then water, then earth, and finally, when packed as tightly as it possibly can be, it becomes solid stone. He provided a completely rational, physical mechanism for the incredible diversity of the entire world. Let's wrap it all up in part 5, the Milesian legacy. So the crucial point is that in the span of just 3 generations in one single city, these thinkers pulled humanity out of mythology and thrust us right into reason. By constantly critiquing and improving upon each other's ideas, they laid the absolute groundwork for all future scientific inquiry. They shifted our perspective from angry gods to the laws of nature. They taught us to look for the hidden unity beneath all the surface-level chaos, and particularly with Anaximenes' brilliant idea that quantitative changes in density create different elements, they laid the conceptual runway for Democritus and the modern atomic theory that would follow centuries later. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to consider today. When we look at physicists at CERN right now, literally smashing atoms together to find the Higgs boson, or theorists calculating the vibrations of microscopic strings in multidimensional space, aren't they fundamentally doing exactly what Thales did? I mean, sure, our tools have evolved from blowing breath on our hands to multi-billion-dollar particle accelerators, but our cutting-edge science is still passionately chasing the exact same question posed on the shores of Miletus over 2,500 years ago. What is the underlying arche of everything? Thank you so much for exploring this intellectual revolution with me in this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.